we will have Mr. Paul Palmarozza presenting, Mr. Robert Arnett, Mr. Chirapat Prapandvidya, I hope I pronounced his name properly, Paramacharya Sadasivanathaswami, Mr. Oscar Pujol. May I please request, I think anytime giving individual introductions, because as Makarandji pointed out to me, it's all there in the book, and we are very short of time. I hand this over to you now, Makarandji.
Thank you so much. Thank you. May I please request everybody in the audience to take their seats. I know that this is the last session of our wonderful soft power conference, and I wish to, like the others before me, really congratulate the organizers. I'm supposed to be one of them. I can't be congratulating myself, but I'll do that. Wonderful. So could I have my slideshow, please? Yeah, you can keep it there.
Can we all settle down, please? Can everybody please come and take their seats? Excuse me?
Slideshow? Yeah, if I were falsely modest, I would have said, you're going to see the least at last, but I'm not going to be falsely immodest either and say the best for the last. But when it comes to language and literature, let me tell you that what India has to offer is certainly next to no other country in the world. I'm going to very quickly run through, how do I... Okay, lovely. Good. In my show, I want to tell you that there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is that as a linguistic and literary area, I suppose the Indian subcontinent or India is one of the richest in the world. Just imagine, what would the world be without the Vedas, the Upanishad, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Shadarshanas, Tripitaka, Jaina literature, Sangam literature, Shilapadikaram, Mani Mekhalai, the Divya Prabandhams, Andal, Manikavachagar, Kamban, Tulsi, Kabir, Basava, Tukaram, Pothana, and so on and on and on, right to Tagore, Sri Aurobindo, Naipaul. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Raymond Schwab called The Oriental Renaissance, which says that Europe's rediscovery of India's classical past is what triggered their second Renaissance. The first was triggered by the discovery of their own Greek and Latin texts in the past. But the bad news is there are fundamental obstacles to our own self-understanding. There's a great deal of ignorance about ourselves and our traditions, of course, and we have to take cognizance of some remedial measures: recognition, rectification, and restoration. The sad truth is that none of our writers today, apart from those writing in English, has any global profile to speak of, though we have such rich literature in more than 22 languages. Part of it is a problem of translation and the fact that our own awards, including the Gyanpith Award, which for the first time has gone to Amitav Ghosh, an English writer, do not have international recognition, let alone the Sahitya Academy and the regional awards, which are not recognized at all. So the question for all of us, and for those interested in soft power, is how to change this. Can we build our own ecosystem where our own languages and literatures are recognized the world over? Okay. So let me quickly run through this. What are the axes of misunderstanding that we face? One is, of course, the colonial past, the imperial gaze, Orientalism and after. You know, the empire of knowledge in which we are still subalterns. We are still on the fringes of the empire of knowledge. And of course, epistemic neo-imperialism. We heard here how India has such a bad press the world over, partly because of this. We had a panel on education system. Unfortunately, higher education in India is in a really bad state. Our best students are exported abroad. And what we have in India, look at our PhDs in the social studies and humanities, and you'll see that we've become a country where our young people are not taught to think clearly. Our own knowledge of our languages is so dismal, not just English, any language, our own mother tongues. And without knowing our own languages, how can there be cognition? And then the idea of the heathen in his blindness. This is a phrase I've got from S. Balagangadhara, who was supposed to be here, S.N. Balagangadhara. And how the dominance of the Judeo-Christo-Islamist, secularist, Marxist, scienticist prisms, really dominates the world. I can just call it, the age-old tension between the monothetic, I don't call them monotheistic, the monothetic and, the plurithematic. That's what India is. And it's this pluralism which is, in fact, at threat. And finally, our own stupidity and incompetence, where we have come to substitute, slogans, shibboleths, political correctness, and all kinds of virtue signaling and gesturing for real knowledge of our own traditions, for real textual competence to understand, our own traditions. And this is what we face today, that whatever we may say about foreign scholars, they are still producing critical editions of our own texts, which we are unable to produce. For the last 30, 40 years, I doubt whether there's been any major Indian text which has been critically reinterpreted, or even a critical edition and translation of our major text has been produced in India. Anyhow, but how do we go from the remedial to the intermediate? I just wanted to say that when it comes to power, both soft and hard, just read The Secret of the Veda by Sri Aurobindo. You see that a Vedic mantra was a combination of action. I mean, it was kriya, right? And it was also poetry. It was aesthetics. In addition to that, it was mantra. And finally, it was transformative. In other words, it could do real things in the real world, elevate your consciousness, and actually harmonize the three worlds, the human world, the natural world, and the supernatural world, or the world of the gods. And somewhere we lost that, We lost that integral knowledge, the integral epistemology of the Vedas. And actually the challenge for tomorrow, if we have to preserve planetary existence itself, is how to regain it. But just look at the resources that India has when it comes to language and literature. There is the Shatapada Brahmana, the Kalpa Shastra, where the force of imagination is what brings the world into existence. Our great grammatical tradition, and then Tantra and Trika, and finally to Sri Aurobindo. I have here a slide which tries to encapsulate, this entire structure of how our poetic literature can be understood. You can just glance at it. We don't have, time to look at it, but it looks at the diversity of our literary traditions in the classical period, from Kavya to drama to Shravya, the Sanskrit, Prakrit, Apabhramsha, the Mishra, and of course later the great so-called vernaculars and their efflorescence, where in a sense we share the same chronology with Europe as well, when all our great languages of today, burst forth from the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries onwards. So, just to go over this Vangmay, the huge, corpus of material that is expressed in words. And, you can see in the Agni Purana, Dhvani, Varna, Pada, Vakya, Shastra, Itihas, Kavya, and, the classification systems also of these great texts which were prevalent at that period. And let's not forget our great grammatical tradition, perhaps one of India's greatest gifts to the world. I think about Panini's grammar, Leonard Bloomfield called it one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. And we have the Trimurti, Panini, Katyayana, and Patanjali. and I don't think there's anything in contemporary times, in fact, in the whole history of human thought, that can match what Panini accomplished. I want to quickly go over some more of our own ways in which we understood, Sahitya. Look at Vishwanatha's Sahitya Darpana and the varieties of drama. 10 varieties of drama were produced in India. We don't know most of them. We only know Natak, But look at the other one, Prakrana and Vyayoga. We've lost all of these Vithi, the smaller Praharshana and all that. All these different varieties of drama we've lost. Here's another classification, Rajashekhara's Kavya Mimamsa, a really famous text of 8th and 9th century, which explains the fundamental features of Indian literature, which is it is multilingual, it's not just in Sanskrit. In fact, Kalidasa's plays have Sanskrit and Prakrit spoken. It's also regionally diverse, and it is in a variety of forms and styles. And it's also secular, it's not just divine or spiritual literature. We produce a huge quantum of secular literature, whether it was in metallurgy or medicine. And the quantum of that, I'm going to come to that very soon, towards the end of my slideshow. I want to bring one aspect of our great literary and grammatical tradition which is not that well known, and that refers to the Trika tradition of Kashmir, what is often called Kashmir Shaivism. And I want to refer you to this incredible text which has been translated as the Trident of Wisdom, Paratrishika Vivarana. Jaidev Singh has translated it, and Paul Muller Ortega has written a foreword to it. And the basic idea in this text is that the whole world is composed through Vak, through language, through Vak Shakti. And if you can master Vak, you can actually, Okay, I want to read you just one little piece from here. The Supreme contains all the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, the 50 letters and the 16 vowels from La to Ha are forms of energy representing the Supreme that is transcendent to manifestation. The remaining 34 phonemes are consonants, and they are also forms of energy manifesting the various tattvas or categories of existence. So phonemes are not merely inert letters. They are creative powers of the universe. The universe is not simply visible phenomenon or manifestation of the divine. It is the utterance of Paravak, the verbal power of the divine. Manifestation is known as Varna Shrishti, phonemic creation in Shivagama. The phonemes are the matrikas, the little mothers who are busy creating the universe and in effecting everyday activity of life. So, in other words, every word, every syllable, if uttered with the power of awareness and knowledge, is actually a mantra. So this tradition is so powerful when it comes to language and literature, and we've forgotten it. It's like standing on the heaps of a ruined civilization with signs and symbols which, you cannot decode. Like Sadhguru said, you've got a container, but the key is lost. You don't know what's in it. Here's a chart of the arrangement of the matrikas, if you just look very quickly, in the Parasamvitti. And we don't have time to go into it, but it just gives you a sense of how deeply they understood the different Shaktis represented by Vak, power, the power of consonants and vowels. In fact, consonants and vowels produce the universe because they are female and male. And in their union, not just sounds are produced, like sphota, but the whole universe comes into being through that. I want to very quickly go over the period of Persian ascendancy in India. There are two periods of this. One is during the so-called Sultanate, and then the Mughal period. And we hardly know that more Persian literature was produced in India than actually in Iran. And this is what we do in India. Even when we take something over, especially when it comes to language and literature, we simply outperform and outproduce even the place where we borrowed it from. In the colonial period, we are very familiar with this. I don't want to go over, but we produced a Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore. What an incredibly successful and, you might say, astounding literary phenomenon. Novels, short stories, poems, songs, plays, literary criticism, essays. There's nothing in the entire gamut of literary production that he did not quite try. Autobiography as well. And of course, Sri Aurobindo, I think one of the greatest minds of the world of the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, I want to come to a slightly controversial topic, because in the last few years, we are so fond of talking about how English dominates India and how English should be dislodged. And I think it's more important to say lao than hatao, because one of the things we don't want to acknowledge, this is the 2001 census of India. 2011 is even more radical. English is the second most widely spoken language in India. So to reverse this is not going to be easy. The number of English speakers, if you just look there, is 125 million, which is more than those in UK, second only to the United States. And of course, they are not first language speakers. The first language speakers of English are only 226,000. These are second and third language speakers of English in India. And in the 2011 census, the figure has gone from 12.18% to over 14%. Now, that is a huge number. It's, I would suppose, 150 million people. So we shouldn't forget that Indians have contributed to English literature on an unprecedented scale in the last few decades. You have several Booker Prize winners who are Indians or of Indian origin: V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, Kiran Desai, Arvind Adiga. You can look at the others who have been nominated. Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie was nominated for the Booker of the Bookers. For 25 years, they believed no text was more influential than a book written by an Indian in English. V.S. Naipaul also won the Nobel Prize, of course, in 2001. So this is an incredible success. And finally, our own homegrown successes. Amish, my friend, was supposed to be here. He's not here. He gets an advance of $1 million, about 5 or 6 crores, for a set of books that he writes, which is more than what Rabindranath Tagore earned in his whole entire life from literature. So times are changing, and India is going to become, and has already become, a superpower when it comes to the production of English texts. I now come to the end of my presentation. I want to point out that if you look at the total number of manuscripts in any Western text, the maximum is attributed to the New Testament. And I've put down some figures there: 5,800 Greek, about over 10,000 Latin, and 9,300 other manuscripts in ancient languages. If you add up all of these, they come to about 26,000 manuscripts. But there are more than 4.1 million manuscripts in India catalogued by the Manuscript Mission of India as of 2016. There must be more. These have been catalogued. And of these, 1.16 million, pardon me, are in Sanskrit alone. So this was the quantum of literary production in India. I want to come to the conclusion of my presentation, and we have an excellent panel. I just want to read this out. Verbal art, with its history of continuous evolution and development for over 3 millennia in India, had the declared purpose of attaining worldly success in the here and now and everlasting glory or immortality in the hereafter. Kleos aptithon of the Greeks, which is a younger cognate of the Sanskrit Shreyo Akshatam. This aspiration was to be accomplished by the positive realignment and harmonization of 3 orders of existence: the human, the natural, and the divine. Verbal art in its entire range, from brief, potent incantations or mantras to the massive and magnificent epic monuments in verse, was key to this triple transformation. It was through the conscious and informed utterance of the mantra or sacred word that these 3 worlds were to be brought into consonance. Such magical use of verbal art is common not only to elite and classical cultures in India, but also to indigenous folk and in our own times, to popular cultures. The use of language, verbal more than scriptal, through the use of language, verbal more than scriptal, human beings were considered to be co-creators in a participatory and performative universe. Thank you so much. May I now invite our first speaker in this panel, in this distinguished panel, the Paramacharya Sadasivanathaswami, to present to us his observations. Swamiji.
Om Sadashiva Samarambam Nandinada Sunanditam Tirumulara Siddhanta Tejo Rashmi Prakashitam Varitam Guru Birloke Shuseshneha Samanvitai Sadanaya Gurudevasya Shiva Sanmarga Gaminaha. Aloha, everyone. You're probably as mystified as I am of what the editor of a magazine is doing in the language and literature panel. My best guess and hope is that someone read our articles and thought it was good enough to be called literature. Other than that, I'm not sure. So I hope you'll enjoy. I made you a little movie, and I'm going to take you on a little journey. We can begin. This is a sunset photo. It was just taken yesterday from my office in Hawaii. And my guess is the young monks wanted you to take pity on me. To the right, you can see of the river is a Siva temple that we're building, hidden there in the forest. It's a Chola-style granite temple, hand-carved in Bengaluru, and we've been bringing it to Hawaii for the last 30 years. With that brief biographical context, our Muganatha-Swami and I are very honored to be here. For 50 years, I've been a Hindu monk living on that remote island, and since 1979, I've been the editor of this magazine. And this afternoon, I've been asked to speak to you of our work in global Hindu media and take you on a journey of U.S. media attitudes. Our founder, Satguru Sivaya Subramanya Swami, was an innovative spiritual leader whose global vision transformed the diaspora, renewing Hindu identity and pride throughout the globe. He understood the power of the press and so created a publication that would serve the entire Hindu world, all sampradayas, all communities, and all nations. Let me share with you a couple of milestones on our journey so far. On July 5th of 1996, a sheep named Dolly was born in Scotland. Here she is. Dolly was the very first mammal to be cloned from an adult somatic cell. And her birth began a firestorm in America about the ethics of cloning, ultimately the ethics of human cloning. Bill Clinton, the president at the time, created a Blue Ribbon Committee to reach out to the 5 major religions in the US for their theological stance on cloning. He was eager that the religious perceptions should guide legislation. The president's panel asked my team to submit the Hindu perspective on human cloning to guide that legislation in Washington. 3 years later, Hinduism Today was approached by the Texas Medical Association to help them revise and expand a book on common medical issues. The book, called Faith of Our Patients, was to be a guide for physicians in the US to treat patients in accord with their religious beliefs. Hindu perceptions on such matters had been so long neglected that we accepted the challenge and reached out to the Hindu leaders around the world for the answer, assembling their responses and we published a 24-page summary of Hindu medical ethics, which is now available online and free. This is the article that we did. Next came Hindu issues about environment. We were asked to write the first Dharmic declaration on climate change in 2009, which we did, and presented it to the Parliament of World's Religions in Melbourne, Australia. So you may wonder, what do we write about? Well, in 2011, we told the story of the celebration of Diwali in the White House, attended by President Obama, and introduced by Captain Pratima Dam, who was the first Hindu chaplain in the US Army. We explored Hinduism in Bali, which is quite differently evolved from the rest of the world, focusing on Bali's arts, elaborate temple offerings, and unique cremation rites. In the summer of 2013, two of us spent a month in Europe. We traveled through 7 countries and visited all the diaspora communities, the temples, the yoga schools, and monasteries. And for the first time that we're aware of, there was a full accounting of Hinduism and yoga in Europe. So let's turn back the clock to see just how profoundly yoga and Hinduism have evolved in the last 100 years in the US. Compare this 1911 image of an ash-covered yogi with this sultry invitation to yoga in a recent upscale spa. Back in 1911, Current Literature magazine published an article called "The Heathen Invasion of America," which concluded, literally, yoga means the path that leads to wisdom. Actually, it's proving the way that leads to domestic infelicity and insanity and death. So 100 years later, Time magazine wrote, "Stars do it, sports do it, judges in the highest courts do it. Let's do it." That yoga thing, a path to enlightenment that winds back 5,000 years in its native India, yoga has become so hot, so cool, so very this minute. Time magazine put yoga on its cover twice. Once in 2001, calling it a science, and again in 2003, writing of its potential for mental and physical well-being. Reading these articles, you might think that the media was pointed in the right direction. You would be wrong. Take, for example, the 2014 CNN article by Jessica Rivets, who spent 2 weeks in Rishikesh meeting with swamis and visiting the ashrams and yoga schools there. Her article spoke respectfully of the spiritual richness she encountered, and CNN had dozens of great photos from her visit, like these on the screen. But they opted to go with the most bizarre photo possible, this 105-year-old yogi in a pretzel-like pose. An otherwise great article was marred by CNN's insolent choice. Happily, there are forces of social evolution at work in the larger US public square where yoga has gone so mainstream, you can download 2,500 apps related to yoga. Much to the consternation of Christian fundamentalists, yoga is infiltrating corporations in America, as we heard the other day, including these corporations and businesses that are all providing on-site yoga classes for their employees. Many who come to yoga in the West eventually, maybe slowly, go deep enough to discover true Indian spirituality. More than 22 million Americans and 2 million Canadians practice yoga, driving a $20 billion, not a $10 billion, a $20 billion industry. But things are moving in a different direction in a Southern California school district, where yoga classes have been designed for children. These are children ages 6 to 11. And it all started with a grant, a $550,000 grant from the local KP Joyce Foundation to create a wellness program for kids. But for some, Yoga is a four-letter word to be avoided at all costs. One group of parents asked a judge to stop classroom yoga, and the attorneys argued that teaching Hatha yoga postures was promoting Hindu thought and spiritual life. On the other side, these parents hired their own attorneys to defend their children's right to practice yoga in school. And on July 1st, 2013, the presiding judge, this is him, John Mayer, ruled that yoga could stay in the classroom, opening the doors for thousands of schools to adopt similar programs. This is not the only yoga court battle in my litigious country. As of 2018, there were 7,842 yoga copyrights, 1,843 patents, and 5,213 yoga trademarks. Yoga teachers in my country are trying to shackle each other's hands. They're suing for trademark and patent infringement. Our team is following those court cases. A few years back, this is so interesting to me, a senior Newsweek editor wrote a provocative editorial which she titled, "We Are All Hindus Now." She's talking to the American public. She reported that 33% of Americans cremate their dead, 25% believe in reincarnation, and 65% believe that other spiritual paths can lead to salvation or liberation. This is a new idea in American society. In the decades ahead, we're hoping to see Hinduism's profundities and passions rediscovered, not only abroad, but here in Bharat as well. Yet another way India's soft power is at work in the West is through an unexpected influence of science. Not the known science, the Newtonian science, but the new science of consciousness. It is an emerging field that deals with the mind and with reality itself. We published this major article on it last year, and it's been brought up 3 or 4 times in the last 3 days. I find that fascinating. This new science is highly mystical, deeply immersed in quantum physics. It is positing a more profound understanding of consciousness that is non-local and non-reliant on brain activity. Their seed premise is that the brain does not create consciousness. Rather, consciousness creates the brain and all things. And much of their work is reminiscent of the Upanishads. 3 leaders of this new science created a manifesto addressed to Newtonian science, and in it they argued for a subjective universe rich with awareness and called for the demise of the duality of observer and observed. The authors of this manifesto are Deepak Chopra, a Vedantin, Minas Kafatos, a quantum physicist and Kashmir Saivite, and my friend Rudy Tanzi, America's foremost Alzheimer's scientist and a student of the Hindu guru. These men, and I want to add to this list Subhash Kak, are all intellectually rooted in India's spiritual soil, and they are affecting a tectonic shift of human perception and identity. This is soft power at its intellectual best and most powerful. We want to conclude with a call for a new soft power to be considered by all of you. It's one that's missing from any list that I've seen, and that missing soft power is our temples and the community of worshipfulness that they nurture. Our temples, ancient and new, are amazing expressions of Hindu belief and practice. They drive pilgrimage, lucrative pilgrimage, and tourism. They bring seekers from India to India from all over the world, and they offer daily ceremonies and year-round festivals for joyous celebration and togetherness. They give solace and a sought-after connection with the divine. They preserve and promote Hindu philosophy, Sanskrit liturgy, and the Vedic agamic perceptions of man and God. But this is not just about India's temples. There are over 1,000 Hindu temples in America and hundreds in Europe. BAPS is building an Akshardham in Robbinsville, New Jersey, that is bigger than the one here in New Delhi. Such temples are important regional ambassadors of Indian knowledge and goodwill, and often they are the most visible emblem of an Indian community's presence in a Western city. Yet despite all of this, we almost never speak of our temples. It is time we broke that silence and acknowledged the temple's strategic place in the constellation of soft powers. I thank you. Om Namah Shivaya. Shivaya Namah.
Thank you, Swamiji. Mr. Paul Palmarozza, please.
Well, thank you to the India Foundation and the Center of Soft Power for the invitation. And brothers and sisters of India and all around the world, it's very good to be here to cooperate in this very worthwhile effort to develop and promote fine culture of India. Now, I'd like to start with a little prayer which the Vice President of India sounded. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. May all be happy. May all be without disease. May all creatures have well-being, and none have misery of any kind. And this may all be happy is an important theme that I think will run through this whole question of our soft power. I will look at three important elements of a culture: language, the Sanskrit language, education, and this is the focus of it, and the spiritual tradition as manifested in the literature, the fine spiritual literature. And I think there's one other thing here that we need to keep in mind, because I'm going to speak about the great benefits that have been accrued through teaching children Sanskrit from the very beginning, other people learning Sanskrit and having access to this tremendous wealth of spiritual knowledge as well as this fine language. But when you're considering soft power, I think one thing is very important, and that is the bhavana, the motive behind. You could say, yes, we'd like to have more soft power to better influence the world, etc. And yes, that's fine, but I think it's better that the whole motive behind it is simply to share it, to share the wealth so that all can be happy. And when that is done in that way, there will be the influence, quite naturally. So, look at this language of India, Sanskrit. The word Sanskriti means cultured, so I think it's very appropriate that it's one of the key elements of soft power. It's a classical language of the finest quality, the source of many of the Indo-European languages, including Greek, Latin, English, as many of the Indian languages. And learning Sanskrit helps one to learn other languages quickly and more completely. So there's a number of practical aspects here as well. Other benefits include the orderly grammar, fine orderly grammar, which helps encourage clear logical thinking. There's the precise sounds about the language and helps sharpen the listening and the speech skills. And most importantly, I find, is to help develop a more in-depth understanding of the spiritual tradition that's manifest. Now, in the past, the impact of Sanskrit has had a great effect on the West. So it was first recognized as a power in the 19th century. Some early advocates, William Jones, more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, more exquisitely refined than either. There's a Western philosopher acknowledging the finest quality of this language. Schopenhauer, I believe that the influence of the Sanskrit literature will penetrate not less deeply than did the revival of Greek literature in the 15th century. Now, I've been doing some study. I don't have time to really discuss it, but we're in a periods of cultural cycle, and the cycle of India's culture is moving towards a renaissance. It's begun, and it will continue. And Sanskrit and access to these great traditional works will help fuel this. Max Muller, Sanskrit is to the science of language, the science of language, what mathematics is to astronomy. It's very fine. Now, when we speak of the literature, these texts, the Vedas, the Shruti, the Upanishads, Smriti, the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana. For me, the Bhagavad Gita has been the real opening up. When I was first exposed to it, I thought, this is so beautiful, not only philosophic, but giving practical guidance in life. Not only speaking about Dharma, but helping to understand our true nature. And that's what prompted me to study Sanskrit, to want to go in more depth to it. Now, the Bhagavad Gita in itself has made a great impression in the West. Ralph Waldo Emerson. You can see some of these things. The key part, I find, is where he speaks about a voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate has pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us. In other words, the same issues are being addressed. And Aldous Huxley, when he speaks about it being the most clearest and most comprehensive summary of the perennial philosophy, the unchanging, common to all. Hence its enduring value not only for the Indians, but also for mankind. So here again, by making it more available, we are contributing to the happiness of all. Because anyone who does really connect with this will begin to understand better their true and beautiful self. Now, Mr. Modi has produced a 10-year plan for the modernization and integration of the teaching of Sanskrit in schools in India from the very beginning right up to the university level. And in that report is this statement about how both Gandhi and Vivekananda recommended very strongly that Sanskrit be studied. And it says in the report, every effort should be made to make Vivekananda's and Gandhi's vision a reality. These are great teachers. They've seen, they know. And I think it would be very worthwhile to follow that guidance. Let's look at now the context in which we've learned. St. James' School in London was founded in 1975. Now, a little background. The organization behind it is called the School of Economic Science, and they were founded in the 1930s to try and understand the natural laws governing society, the Dharma. And they worked on that and then moved into philosophy. And in the 1960s, they were blessed with an introduction to a great sage, Sri Shantananda Saraswati, who was the Shankaracharya of the North in Jyotirmat. And the leader of the school would go there every 2 years, and His Holiness would simply answer questions. They weren't trying to convert him. They said, you must use your own culture. But as the answers kept coming, and he explored all different areas, Sanskrit came out, the commonality between the different traditions came out, and many people in this school started to study Sanskrit. And then in 1975, they founded this primary school in London, and Sanskrit, from the very beginning, was the basis of teaching all the languages. And it was a mandatory part of this primary school curriculum. Now that's a real example of abhaya, fearlessness, to start a school in London in 1975 with mandatory part of your curriculum being the study of Sanskrit. It's worked. It has worked. The students are exposed to the beautiful and profound Sanskrit literature in the original form from 4 years old, and they sound the shlokas with the English meaning as well. It's not just random. They learn the meanings as well. So, what we've discovered, it really does work in helping establish greater clarity and accuracy in thinking, reading, and speaking. And this is the key point. The communication skills that are enhanced through the study of Sanskrit is something that's extremely important and practical. This is the practical dimension to it. And it's enhanced, especially for young people entering university, then going into business and into a very diverse global world. Communication skills are crucial, and this study of Sanskrit we have seen does work. The other part is the Sanskrit texts used that were developed by the teachers use the stories from the Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and they're presented so that the students are getting beautiful philosophic teaching, but also teaching that's very practical. The teachers worked for more than 20 years to develop and get accepted the equivalent to Year 10 and Year 12 exams. Because St. James Schools now has more than 1,000 pupils right up through the senior level. So they worked on these exams, and Cambridge now has decided that the Year 10 exam, called IGCSE, will become a standard exam, and Cambridge will promote it globally. They've seen the value of it, and it will be promoted globally. Unfortunately, there weren't enough numbers for the Year 12 exam, but we're trying to look for other alternatives to that. St. James also teachers spent 20 years developing textbooks, developing them, testing them, using them. And I was in charge of the publishing at St. James, and I took a group to the first World Sanskrit Book Fair in Bangalore. And I took 300 books, and I laid them out on the stand, and they were sold on the first day. And in the stand opposite was Motilal Banarsidass, looking, very interesting. Since 2012, they've published them, and the books are about stories of Krishna, Rama. More than 50,000 of these books have been sold since then, or at least published. That's the Rama. Beautiful books. People like them for two reasons. Yes, the content, but secondly, it was a very systematically and simply presented with some very good illustrations. Now, when the books were published in India, the Motilal went to a renowned Sanskrit expert here in India, and he read the books very carefully, and he said, after this careful, I am convinced of their utility for the Indian schools, well graded, supported by appropriate illustrations, etc. So the bridge has been made. it's not us. We just are responding and not trying to do it our way. This is our appropriate presentation of the way we were taught. We have very dedicated teachers. This is Elena and Warwick Jessup, who are the current authors of the books. The children do beautiful writing. They really love it. It's a very popular subject. It's not forced upon people. And in 2010, St. James students were invited to chant Vedic hymns, in the presence of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace to celebrate the beginning of the Commonwealth Games. And can we play the video, just a short excerpt from it? It's available online. Go ahead. Play it. Okay. I'll just give you a taste of it. Now, next slide. No, just, you've got more. Go ahead. The St. James schools, they've supported other schools in South Africa. Now, one more short video. This is when Mr. Modi visited this school in Ireland, and he was welcomed by these students. Let's give it a brief. Okay. See, the happiness of all, you see? Okay, next. Okay. Now, just a final summary. Sanskrit at St. James, and that's what I'm the director of, is a soft power agent. This is how we see ourselves. Our aim, we founded in 2012, is to support and promote the teaching of Sanskrit in schools on a global basis. And we're developing new materials, we're training teachers, a lot of online material. We are very supported, here we go, by the ICCR. They've been supporting us, as have the Indian High Commissioners. This is an example of a conference we ran, a joint conference on the contemporary relevance of the Bhagavad Gita. So, here's the summary. Thousands of young people in the West have benefited greatly from the study of Sanskrit language and the Indian literature. It's worked. And we weren't selling it, we were just presenting it. They've benefited intellectually, practically, and spiritually. And that's an important aspect. Now, so we're most grateful to India for this language and the literature, two jewels of your culture. It's our hope, though, that the modern educational world in India will begin to give greater emphasis and support to the study of Sanskrit. To have real power, it must be fully experienced here in India, physically, intellectually, and spiritually. When that happens, and I think the trend is, all will benefit. There'll be less misery and disease around the world. All will be happy. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Palmarozza. I just hope that the St. James's model can be replicated in India where it is really needed, you know, and schools in our major cities take to this, you know, passion for Sanskrit and benefit from it equally. May I now invite Professor Chirapat Prapandvidya from Thailand, from the Silpakorn University. He has done a lot to promote Sanskrit there.
First of all, I would like to thank the India Foundation and the Center for Soft Power for inviting me to participate in this very interesting conference where we meet people from different disciplines to come together and share our knowledge. I was brought up in the country where we have 90% of Buddhists. So maybe this is the largest population of Buddhists in Southeast Asia. We actually didn't feel much different between the culture of India and the culture of Thailand, because we are very much taught in the way of life of the Buddhists. So instead of praying in Sanskrit, we pray in Pali language, which is one of the ancient languages of India, maybe somewhat later than the Sanskrit language. So I feel that if the Thai people have the opportunity to be trained in learning Sanskrit, they maybe learn faster because we have the advantage of the Indian culture. We feel the same thing like India. We feel that we have the rebirth because of our karma, and we have to have moksha. Moksha, in Pali we call it vimutti. Vimutti means freedom, but it's not freedom like English, but it is freedom from the bondage, which is the karma, which is the cause of our rebirth. So if we can get rid of the karma, then we don't have to have the next rebirth. So this is our belief. I would like to tell you about the history of Indian culture a little bit. On the basis of literary evidence, the contact between India and Southeast Asia dates back to a few centuries BCE. On the basis of the bead, of Mauryan beads being found in Thailand, the contact between India and Thailand must have taken place during Mauryan period, which is about 300 years BC. On the epigraphic evidence, Sanskrit must have reached Southeast Asian soil around 2nd century BC, AD, whereas inscription in Pali having early teaching of the Buddha as their content date back as early as 4th or 6th century. The Mahavamsa, the Chronicle of Sri Lanka, mentioned that King Ashoka sent two Buddhist monks named Sona and Uttra to Suvarnabhumi, which is located in mainland Southeast Asia. We can see that the contact between India and Southeast Asia existed very early in history. The people, the Thai people, appear in the history of Southeast Asia as early as the 11th century. They are known in one Sanskrit inscription as Siam. The region where the Thailand presently is situated was earlier the land of the Mon and the Khmer, who were strongly influenced by Indian culture. Ancient official languages then were Sanskrit, which later became the loanwords of the local languages, including Thai language. Before the establishment of Sukhothai Kingdom of the Free Thai, in the 13th century, the Thai must have been the vassal state of Cambodia, the ancient kingdom of the Khmer. The Thai must have absorbed Indian cultural influence mainly through the Khmer and Mon. The main cultural elements from India are Sanskrit, Pali, Buddhism, Hinduism, which is known in Thai as Sasana Pram, or the Brahmanism. Common Sanskrit and Pali loanwords in Thai are many. These are some examples. Ahan from Ahara, food. Akash from Akasha, sky or air. Rod is Ratha or car. Rod also means taste from rasa in Sanskrit. Bab is papa, sin. Sukh is sukha, happiness. Thuk, dukkha, suffering. Bhikshu, Buddhist monk. Pad from Vaidya or Vaidya, medical doctor. Keha from Geha, house. Thorasap from Dura Shabda, telephone. Thoratat from Duradashana, television, and so on. In terms of literature, Thailand has Ramayana, that is Thailand has Ramakien, that is Ramayana, of which the main theme follow the Valmiki Ramayana, while many episodes were taken
from the regional Ramayana of India. Thai author took some episodes from the Mahabharata and retold as Thai literature. Many Jataka stories are well known to the Thai, and they were used as tools by the monk to instill modern teaching in the minds of the Thai Buddhists. A large number of Sanskrit inscriptions are found in Thailand and Cambodia. They are rich literary sources of Indian culture, history, religion, polity, and literature. In terms of art, Buddhist and Brahmanic images are found in Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar. These images require religious scripture, which are mostly in Sanskrit, to identify them. Hence, the Thai culture has been strongly affiliated to India since early time. Thailand is a Buddhist country with more than 90% of are Buddhists. A great number of Thai Buddhist monks have good knowledge of Pali, hence they have a better understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, especially in Theravada Buddhism. But their knowledge of Mahayana Buddhism and Hinduism is still lacking, as Mahayana Buddhism and Hinduism use Sanskrit in their scripture. The Thai Buddhist monk play a very significant role in the modern life of the Thai Buddhists. So if we can educate the Thai monk to have a knowledge of Sanskrit, then the feeling of difference between Hinduism and Buddhism can be solved. At present, we still think that Hinduism is a foreign religion. So sometimes they may not be able to easily feel like to accept. But actually, when you know Sanskrit, the similarity between Buddhism and Hinduism is very, very close. So that means the significance of Sanskrit in understanding between Hinduism and Buddhism and Indian culture is very important. Sanskrit study in Thailand probably began during the reign of King Chulalongkorn of Chakri dynasty, who ruled between 1868 to 1910. The king himself has good knowledge of Sanskrit and Indian culture. He visited India in his reign, and the experience from that visit helped him to save Thailand from being colonized by Western power at that time. A Brahmin named Kapuswami was recruited from India as a resource person of Sanskrit by King Vachirawut Ramadasi. Sanskrit courses, however, were included in very few Thai universities only around 70 years ago. Silpakorn University, where I belong, has included Sanskrit in its curriculum since 1955. Department of Oriental Languages, Faculty of Archaeology, Silpakorn University, has offered Sanskrit program leading to master degree and PhD degree since 1992. The only university in Thailand that offer master degree and PhD in Sanskrit. To strengthen the study of Sanskrit, Sanskrit Study Center was established at Silpakorn University in 1996. some Buddhist Sanskrit texts, such as the Mahavastu, the Buddhacharita, Saundarananda, have been translated into Thai by Thai scholars. Sanskrit texts on Indian philosophy, such as the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, and Sanskrit texts on drama, ornate poetry, have also been translated by Thai scholars. With sound knowledge of Sanskrit, I believe the profound knowledge of various aspects of Indian culture, which is the substratum of the culture of the country in Southeast Asia, will be obtained. Hence, this will bring about the strengthening the soft power of in Thailand as well as in the country in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, the World Sanskrit Conference was held in 2015 in Bangkok, and one of the princesses of the royal family herself was a patron, I think. And it's wonderful when you visit Thailand that you see statues of Rama, and the royal family trace their ancestry from Rama, from Vishnu. And I also found the Hindu gods and goddesses, but they're usually outside the house. They are near a tree, they're under a tree. So it's a very interesting osmosis. So I hope that this relationship between India and Thailand grows with time, and that Sanskrit can be the bridge, or one of the bridges. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. May I now request Mr. Robert Arnett to tell us about India discovered, rediscovered? Nope, something else. Good.
Well, namaste. Like all of the speakers, and on behalf of all the speakers and all the participants, we'd like to convey our thanks to India Foundation, all of the sponsoring organizations, and most of all of you who have made this a success. Being a soft power conference, what I'd like to share with you, we've had phenomenal success with 2 books. I say that out of no vanity whatsoever. I think you'll be impressed as we go along, getting them into the public schools and influencing the American mainstream. That's why we were invited, because other than for our books, Mrs. Tarakia and I would be relatively unknown compared to some of the other honorable guests. But again, what I'd like to share with you in the Indic tradition is how we've done it. If it's any use to anyone, great. You find it of no use, do it your own way. But if you know, and I'm particularly will be talking about for writing for a Western audience, but for what I know of India, a lot of the parallels in the West apply to obstacles that you have here in India in wanting to promote religious concepts. So that's, again, if you know where the obstacles are and navigate around them, it can be very simple. Anyway, you may wonder, how did I get here? Gosh, over 50 years ago, I should have used tenor, right? But I didn't. Over 50 years ago, I got very interested in Indian art, architecture, and religion, and then was introduced to Raja Yoga, which really flamed the embers and created the zeal. And out of 3 trips to India in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, came the book. Oh, I guess I need to do this myself. Out of these first 3 trips to India for a year and a half, lasted a total of a year and a half, came India Unveiled about 3 years after it was published, and it was immediately received wonderfully in the U.S. I was giving a talk in a Hindu temple in Houston, Texas, Chinmaya Mission. I met Mrs. Smita Tarakia, who conveyed to me she would like to devote her life to helping with what we're doing, sharing the best of Indian culture and religion with the mainstream and educational systems. And I'd like to say for over 20 years, would you stand up, please, Smita? Smita, in the tradition of the, stay standing. In the tradition of the Indian woman, she's behind the scene, lets me have all the credit, and she deserves it. Without her, it would be impossible for me to be here today with her energy and talents. Editor-in-Chief of India Unveiled for over 20 years, associate photographer, illustrator of our multi-award-winning children's book. It'd be impossible for us to attain what we've attained in the West. It's a saying, behind every great man, it's a great woman. Being in a literary session, I'd say behind every successful author, trust me, it's a great editor. So we devote our whole lives lecturing. Anybody will listen, churches, schools, civic organizations, colleges, wherever we're invited. We do photo exhibits, publish articles, anything we can think of. But to me, what sets India apart from any other country on the earth, and before I get into that, I'm from the southern U.S. In the U.S., they laugh and tease me about how slow I talk and southern accent. So I caution our audience, you're going to learn new ways to pronounce Sanskrit words today, okay? So what sets India apart from any other country in the world, I'd say bar none, is the concept of Dharma. And a little boy taught me what that actually meant on my first trip to India, where I knew intellectually, but not really. And I was in Rajasthan visiting in Mount Abu, Dilwar temples to photograph them. And I'd lost my wallet, dropped it, buying postcards. I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, outstretched arms of a little boy, 8 years, 9 years old, is my wallet. American fashion, oh, I was happy to get it back. Loads of money in it. Tried to reward him, he wouldn't take the money. So obviously he didn't understand, right? I stopped someone who spoke English, had him explain to the boy in his own language why I wanted to reward him for his noble act. Dialogue took place for a few minutes. I thought the man doesn't get it. Finally, the man said to me, the boy wants to be sure I understand that he thinks I should not pay people to do what's right, okay? Dharma. So that's the main story line behind our children's book. And again, schools love it. I'm pleased to say that I'm not doing that. I'm pleased to say the book's been translated into 3 other languages, Spanish, German, and while we're at this conference, we were notified the Portuguese edition has been printed. That will be for Brazil primarily, which very, very spiritual country, very, very interested in Sanskrit and Indian spiritual traditions. In fact, at this conference, we met someone who's going to translate the book into Sanskrit for us. And if anyone would like to translate it into another Indian language, let us know. Next slide, okay. Our most successful project has been putting the books into schools. Somehow the slides have gotten out of order, but in supplementing curriculum in schools. So the map in the U.S., the purple states indicate all of these public schools, elementary, middle, high schools have both India Unveiled and Finders Keepers. So both books are in 8 U.S., all of the schools almost, in 8 U.S. states. California, every high school has India Unveiled. State up Midwest, very conservative state. Indiana, all the elementary, many private schools have Finders Keepers. So all told, Finders Keepers is in over 13,000 public schools in the U.S. India Unveiled slightly behind in 12,000 public schools. And Smith and I identified many years ago that what we need to do is put correct understanding, correct thinking of Indian culture in the schools. Psychology, as you know, have shown what you learn first, it is very difficult to dislodge from the mind. So we wanted to teach the kids proper information, and then when they see this rubbish on Slumdog Millionaire, I hope I don't offend anyone who loved the movie, or other similar things, when they'll think, well, that isn't what I learned in school. So we have been very successful, as you can see from the map, getting the books in grassroots level. That's where change is. It isn't us and them. I mean, it's one, but they don't make the change. It's, you know, we need to do it at a grassroots level and go upwards, not have something vertically come downwards. Our only limitation, schools love both books. They've gotten great reviews in prestigious U.S. library journals that the schools use to determine the books. Our only limitation is funds. And that's F-U-N-D-S, not F-U-N-S, okay? We're a totally independent entity, get no support from any kind of, you know, organization, a foundation, and I often like to say, if you don't believe in God, the success these books have had, the book is obviously something at a higher level of intelligence working rather than us. I hope Smith and I plans, our goals are to get it into every state in the U.S. eventually and other parts of the world. We need to go back one slide. Okay, so sharing the wisdom of Sanatana Dharma in the West. Suggestions, this is how we do it. Do it in a Western cultural context. Don't make it too metaphysical. The Western mind isn't metaphysically inclined. On the contrary, it's metaphysically challenged. So understand what your market is. I'm not talking about dumb it down. You don't have to dumb it down at all, but just write it simply. And if you can't write it simply, I think you need to rethink it at a deeper level. Frankly, I don't know how to say this diplomatically. I read some stuff on Hinduism and so forth, and I'm just talking about no wonder it didn't do well, or people didn't respond to it, because it, you know, just wasn't written in a way that the Western individual could relate to, or more than that, we try to write it in a way that the Western audience can embrace it, not just understand it. Do it in a linguistic manner, not didactic. A quick example, need to keep moving. America's secular, of course, separation of church and state. We're doing finders, keepers, and deeper meaning of namaste, and we wanted to write what it meant. They don't want God stuff in the American schools. They don't want Christian God stuff. They don't want Hindu God stuff as such, meaning preaching, proselytizing. So all we did was, in the ancient Sanskrit language, namaste means the God in me bows to the God in you, my soul bows to your soul, perfect, no complaint, no objection whatsoever, because linguistically that's what it meant. And last of all, I didn't put it on the slide, very important point, don't threaten Jesus Christ, okay? And I mean that, I'm not joking. Just don't threaten him, and it's fine. The West is ready for the Sanatana Dharma, to me, in my opinion, if you do it in the following ways. We need to go back at least, another slide back, another slide. The 2 points to me that cause Hinduism the most problems in the West, in America, is Americans don't understand. It's go back in the scriptures, and there's one unmanifested absolute from which it all came. So if you present it in God in creation, people can understand this. 6th graders can understand this. And the other thing, this comment's mainly to the Indian audience. Please don't refer to your deities as idols. I know why you do it. We don't have time to go into the origin. The British, okay, what's the word for this? Oh, it's an idol. An idol in the Jewish and Christian scripture is a false god. I hear acharyas in the Hindu temples in America, we worship an idol. And that's saying to a Jew or a Christian, we worship a false god. Please don't ever use that word. Don't even translate it if you don't want to. Just say, what's it? It's a murti. And the word I translated as embodiment, and point out that this is not the object of worship. The object of worship is the unmanifested absolute that this represents in this form in creation, which cannot be limited to this inert object because the power itself is omnipresent. As I say, kids can understand that if you just explain it as such. Next slide. And this was showing the murti. I love this. This is outside of Kolkata, Saraswati, and the just faith of the student laying her school books there and the notebooks for the goddess's blessings. And I know we all agree if she studies, it's going to help a little bit. Next slide. And just have a couple of slides to go. I just thought I'd illustrate, and I've heard, seeming to me in the last couple of sessions, some frustrations from both panelists and audiences on putting Hindu terms into English, and of course English is insufficient for the nuances of Hinduism. Everybody knows that. For one English word I read, well, ancient Greek language had 20-something words at least for that one English word. Sanskrit has over 40-something words for that one English word. So of course English is inadequate. But anyway, try to be inclusive and universal in your explanation of it. That's been our way. It's worked so well with the schools. And on that map, most of those states were southern conservative religiously and politically states, and they embraced the books because it's inclusive rather than exclusive. And so the way we show Om, this is in Darjeeling, Goom Monastery, thank you, trumpet being blown, which represents the Om vibration, God's creative, I wrote down, I captioned from India Unveiled, represents God's creative presence in the universe. Most religions have a similar sacred word testifying to the divine presence. Om, Om, to the, okay. To the Hindus, Hum to the Tibetans, Amen to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Hebrews, Christians, Amen to the Muslims. So, of course, when you chant it, the vibration's the same. Om, Amen. Anyway, I again point out, 6th graders can understand this. Next slide. This is our last slide, and then just a few concluding words. This is in a temple in Assam, great example of two things. Murti, obviously they're not worshiping some inert metal Om symbol, but what Om, Patanjali said, what Om is a symbol of God, vibration of God. And so I would like to conclude with, in fact, just want to read our caption from India, in India Unveiled, that this represents God's intelligent, unseen presence in every particle of creation. Again, people can understand that. So, in conclusion, I would just like to say India for millennia has been the guardian of divine truth, not just for those who are blessed to be born here, but for all of humanity. And just as it's been the role of India throughout history to preserve and pass on the wisdom of the ages, Indians of the 21st century have the same global responsibility. People of the West know their civilization, our civilization, is spiritually bankrupt and is turning to India for guidance in spiritual direction. India's role in the 21st century is not to emulate the West, but to serve as a model for the world. A materially efficient democracy that is spiritually guided, which India is uniquely positioned to achieve these two qualities and combine it into its culture. By incorporating the wisdom of the past and being a gateway to the future, India will provide the world a new model of governance as our planet moves into a higher age. Thus, it's imperative that India's legacy always be linked with its cultural origin, which is uniquely distinctive, for it has a divine origin, unlike Google does not. Should that link ever be, and I don't mean that as any, Google serving the world beautifully, so I didn't mean that as any slight as to Google, but anyway. Should that link ever be severed and it become only a secular fad, India's timeless heritage would disappear into the sands of time. By honoring and reincorporating into society its divine origins, which pervaded every aspect of India's ancient civilization to include all of the arts and sciences, India's message to uplift humanity will exist throughout eternity. So in my humble opinion, the quintessence of Indian soft power is her spiritual heritage, although there's certainly many other aspects as well. But most notably, it's the Sanatana Dharma and the great yogic masters that this tradition has produced, which has given the world a step-by-step method to merge soul into spirit to attain moksha, the only reason every one of us are here on earth. And this is something the West is in dire need of today, and something of far greater value than the West could ever give to India in exchange. I'd like to conclude with the last couple of lines from the poem My India by Paramahansa Yogananda, considered a father of yoga in the West. These were the last words from his lips, speaking at a banquet to honor India's ambassador in the U.S. in Los Angeles, California, and his last words were, which represent my sentiments, that's why I use them, where Ganges, woods, Himalayan caves, and man dream God, I am hallowed, my body touch that sod. Namaste.
Thank you, Mr. Arnett and Smitaji, for taking the message of India to the schools of the United States. We appreciate your work very much, and good luck in the future. Our last speaker for this evening, Dr. Oscar Pujol, not to be confused with his namesake, who's a cyclist and has very big mustaches, actually spent a lot of time in India at BHU, 17 years if I'm not mistaken, got a PhD in Sanskrit. He founded the Cervantes Center in Delhi and also Casa de la India in Barcelona. But what's one of his astonishing achievements is that he has completed the Sanskrit Catalan dictionary. And please give him a big hand. And is also working on the Sanskrit Spanish dictionary. My friend Oscar will speak on the soft power of Sanskrit.
Good evening. Thanks to everybody. Thanks, Makarand. And especially thanks to the organizers of this conference. I think I've been really amazed to see how it's been organized. I think it's a good example of a new India that is coming in front of us in a very lively and strong way. I am the last speaker, so I don't know if I have the privilege of speaking less or more. You will decide. But I must say that much more of what I had to say has been already said by Makarand in his excellent, by Paul also. I wanted to speak about the greatness of Sanskrit and the soft power of Sanskrit. There is also one thing that we like to say, that I am really impressed, because I've been to many seminars. I've been to seminars on language, to Indological seminars. I have also been to religious seminars. But I am impressed by the concept that has been taken here. And the concept is soft power, because that has given to this seminar a special width, a special diversity. We have been touching almost all the subjects. And before going into the question of Sanskrit, I would like also to reflect a little bit on this word, soft power. I don't know if you realize that soft power is an oxymoron. As you all know, oxymorons are statements that seem to be contradictory, but they are not. And soft power is an oxymoron because power, we always think it is hard. As somebody said here, soft power ultimately is authority, which is very different from what is soft power. So, oxymorons, I give a few examples if you are, just to refresh your mind. I mean, the classical example of oxymoron is bittersweet, right? We have oxymorons which are really funny, like original copy. We have oxymorons which are really deep, like a dark light, which was also a mystical term, especially from St. John de la Croix. We have oxymorons that are really poetical, like deafening silence. And we have oxymorons that are funny, a small crowd. We have my favorite is, I am clearly confused. But we also touch here an oxymoron, along with soft power, which I think is perverse. And I am sorry that Subhash Kak is not here. That oxymoron is artificial intelligence. There is no artificial intelligence. There is a perverse one. Because if it is artificial, it's not intelligence. And if it is intelligent, it's not artificial. Because as we know, intelligence is a characteristic of consciousness, which is never artificial because consciousness is not made. Well, coming back to soft power, I mean, I think that's the essence of this panel too, that the biggest soft power that we have as humans is the word. Because, and that is not a metaphor. I am not saying that the word, the language, speech is a soft power as a metaphor. It's just by speaking the man becomes a prime minister. He does nothing else than speaking, and he becomes the most powerful man in a country. So really to say, the word is soft power, is the essence of soft power. I would like to say that the Indians have the rare distinction of being the civilization that most acknowledge the power of the word. And that was done especially in the Rig Veda and through the medium of Sanskrit. Dandin said, the word is the light of the world. Without the word, we will fall into darkness, into silence, no? And since we are speaking of soft power, which is different from hard power, I would like to draw the attention to one thing. In Sanskrit, all the words that refer to the word are feminine. Bak, we have Bharati, we have Bhasha, we have Bani, we have Gir, we have plenty of words are always feminine, because soft power is always feminine. And that's the difference between soft power and hard power. I would say in Spanish, for instance, power is masculine, el poder. I don't know in English if it is masculine or feminine, but I will insist this very clearly, that soft power has to be feminine as the word is feminine. Again, all the words in Sanskrit that mean intelligence are also feminine. And that's the important. Sarasvati is feminine, Sarasvati acts as an interface between us humans, our little and individual humanity, and the absolute. And we can communicate. That's the problem. We speak about spirituality, and we can speak in high terms, but the problem is always the same, the intersection point between our little selves and the absolute. And then is done through language. Being which is feminine, again, and it's a feminine power. We have to recognize that, and that's the era we are now coming into. I would like to say one more thing, which reverses a little bit what has been said here during all these days. And people say that without hard power, we don't have soft power. Well, I would like to say the contrary. I am the last speaker, unless nobody will dispute this after me. So I had that privilege at least. I would like to say that without soft power, hard power is nothing. In fact, hard power does not stay without soft power. And I can give examples from politics about that. Think about the Roman Empire. It lasted for 1,000 years. It was not only by the arms. If the Romans had not brought Romanization of the people and Latin culture, I mean, the Roman Empire could have not lasted these 1,000 years. One example of how without soft power, hard power is useless, we have in the collapse of the Soviet Union. When we are left without a narrative, and that's soft power, even if we have our hard power intact, that hard power will eventually collapse. Hard power gives results in the short term, but not in the long run. People have to be convinced. They cannot be always and beaten into submission. They have to be convinced, and they have taken into by the power of the word and the power of culture. I think the British left India for the very same reason. When they came, they had soft power. And you know very well, Makarand, because you are a specialist. And their soft power lasts some time. But when Gandhi came and the new ideas came in the 20th century, their hard power was intact. They won the Second World War. They didn't have any reason to go, but their soft power had gone. Well, I think that was, for me, important to say, to enhance the importance of that wonderful concept, which is soft power, and then bring us together here. Well, I have taken a lot of time, take a little bit more. I try to say I am a Spaniard. I come from Barcelona, a Catalan too. I made a Sanskrit-Catalan dictionary. I am, in 3 months, I hope, the Sanskrit-Spanish dictionary will see the light. It's already in the press. I think, thanks. We in the Spanish-speaking world, Sanskrit is taught in different places, in Spain, also in Mexico is perhaps the country where Sanskrit most flourishes, also in Peru, in Argentina, in Chile, in Colombia, and recently Costa Rica was celebrating his 50 years of Sanskrit. Imagine, such a small country, I'm sure many of you cannot locate it on the map, but it has 50 years of Sanskrit. And that's, like yoga, Sanskrit has become universal heritage. It's not, it's an Indian product. We must never forget that it is Indian. We should never do that. But it's become an universal thing. There are small groups of people all over the world learning Sanskrit and trying to understand reality through the conceptual mapping of Sanskrit. As for myself, you know, I was very happy to be able to come to India. I came to India following a lady. That was my first visit here because a lady who is now my wife, she wanted to come here, so I came here. I didn't have much interest in India, I must confess at that time. Then I was fascinated by the culture here. I read the Gita in a very bad translation, but even bad translations do the work. That's also something that I learned after all these years. And that's an excuse for translators like me. I read the Gita and I was struck by one shlok. It was really impressive. Then I decided to go back to Spain and to come back and study Sanskrit in Banaras. My wife was all too happy because he loves India even more than me. So we came and we spent 16 years in Varanasi at the Banaras Hindu University. I would like to remember my teachers. I spoke with him yesterday, Bhagi Shastri, still alive and going well, 85 years old. And he looked like he was 30 years back. And Sri Narayan Mishra, who unfortunately he died in 2011. They are great scholars. Why a Westerner like me wants to learn Sanskrit? I think Ramdas said it, no? I mean, we have to be reborn. I think we are Patita Hindus. That for something we had to reborn in a Westerner's body, came here. And after we did our mission, and we tried to do our best, you know, to propagate this Hindu Dharma abroad. Going to Banaras and studying Sanskrit there, it is not an easy thing. And the first thing I must say, and it struck me very much, is the indigenous way of learning versus the Western way of learning. I was much struck for the knowledge of a Pandit, how Pandits, they teach Sanskrit. And there is a big difference between a traditional Pandit and a Western scholar. A Western scholar is a person who knows where things are. You ask him for some question, he will go to the shelves, take the book, and then tell you what it's all about. But a Sanskrit Pandit is a person who interiorizes knowledge. He take my Sri Narayan Mishra used to say, you learn one book and that's enough if you learn it well, because it will touch all the darshanas in their discussion. This is very important, the interiorization of knowledge, because sometimes we think we read too much. I know that goes against the grain. We read too much and we assimilate very little. And the traditional way is another one. You memorize the shlokas, you meditate upon them, you bring them into life, and that's something that is still very alive in India. I would like to say that I raise a call also to protect the traditional Pandit. The traditional Pandit is a storehouse of neglected wisdom. There are some of the people, because they are Brahmins, and Brahmins are supposed to be oppressors of the lower caste, but they live very poor lives, and they have no resources to keep their learning, their wisdom. They have to do all kinds of things. I was very happy in Chicago to learn by Hari Kiran and the Indic Foundation, thanks, that they are doing a wonderful job in trying to uplift the material position of traditional Pandits. It has been said here several times. you must preserve all these people who, by not speaking English, and I am not attacking English, they are considered by many Indians as illiterate because they are not able to speak in English, they are not able to put, and they are such sages, such people with such profound knowledge that they need to be protected. And that should be one of the important policies that one should take, protect the traditional Pandit and make them feel honored because they're feeling very, you know, like the last people in the Indian society. Well, I will try to go quickly now. I won't say that having said that, I would like to say that Sanskrit already did a lot of things for the Western countries, and not only the West, but also for the Muslim world. The first Sanskrit revolution took place during the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, the Arabs translated the Sanskrit text, and this Sanskrit text, through Spain, through the School of Translators of Toledo, were put for the first time into Latin. We know that a person called Al-Khwarizmi translated one book called, I think, Hisab al-Hind, as you know, the method of counting of the Hindus. And that was translated into Latin by Spanish translators from the School of Translators of Toledo in the 11th century. And the first zero, the decimal system entered Europe through Spain. For 50 years, the Indian numbers, the decimal numbers, were Toledan numbers. After they changed to Arabic numbers, now we know that they are Indian numbers. And like this, a whole wealth of Indian wisdom came to Europe during the Middle Ages through the medium of the translators in Spain, in Muslim Spain, and into Latin, and that into Europe. And that was the image that Voltaire had of India, that is one of the images of India, the India of knowledge. I cannot refrain, if you give me 2 minutes more, to read one Arab author in the 11th century from Spain, is Ibn Said al-Andalusi, in his book, The Category of Nations, what he had to say the Muslims in the 11th century about India. He says, among the nations of the world, over the passage of centuries and the passage of time, India was known as a veritable mine of wisdom and as a source of justice and good governance. The Indians have been regarded as individuals who demonstrated an excellent understanding of high ideas, of universal principles, of rare talents and inventions. They have studied arithmetic and astronomy. They have also acquired a wealth of knowledge on the movements of stars, the secrets of the celestial sphere, and on the various subtleties of the science of mathematics. Moreover, among all the people, they are the most knowledgeable in the science of medicine and have a thorough knowledge of the properties of medicinal plants, the nature of compound elements, and the peculiarities of the existing things. So this shows, how Islam was regarding India at that time. The second revolution that Sanskrit gave to the Western world was in the 19th century. It's been already referred here by Makarand, and I won't repeat it, but perhaps, you don't, it was MacDonald who said that the discovery of Sanskrit for Europe was like a second Renaissance. And I can give many examples of it, but I give just one. The science of phonetics, which is so important, even for speech recognition, was, Europe knew nothing about that, nothing at all. They don't know the difference between a phoneme, which is sonant, and non-sonant. Many terminology from Western linguistics, like labials, occlusive, dentals, palatals, a labial is a letter pronounced with the lips, like pa, ba, ma, I use the lips. So all this terminology, that is a scientific terminology of linguistics, it's as far as 3,000 years old because we found in the Prati Shakyas. And the Western grammarians knew nothing about that because we Westerners, and this is well documented, were very bad in grammar. And we were good in mathematics, but not good in grammar. And well, to cut it short, and I cannot go at length here, modern linguistics, and Chomsky has recognized that, was born out of Sanskritists. And what they did is to translate many Indian concepts from Paninian grammar into Western terminology. This is not acknowledged today again. And we should remind people about, in the history of science, there's another thing that we have to do, how much even modern science owes to the legacy of Indian science. Well, finally, just to go on finishing, I would like to say that I think, and I wish, and perhaps it could be, I don't know, that we could, if we put a lot of effort, that should have a third Sanskrit revolution into the 21st century. Again, I cannot go into the details of what Sanskrit has to offer in the 21st century. One thing that I advise, we should be aware of not falling into silly things. One silly thing is that it says that language is the most suitable, Sanskrit is the most suitable language for computers. That's not true. That's not the most suitable language for computers is machine language, because they are machines. That's another thing. Sanskrit logic has conceptual categories that can help us to build software, using those concepts and translating them into the language or into programming languages. But that's a different thing. So we should be very careful. But just to go very quickly, Sanskrit can contribute in the 21st century into logic. Formal logic was invented by Indians in the 30th century with Navya Nyaya, Gangesha. Sanskrit can help in aesthetics. The theory of rasa, is the subjective theory of rasa, explains why we are so happy when consuming fiction, when watching movies or seeing the theater, in a way that no Western theory of aesthetics has done. But again, hermeneutics, and here I refer to Mimamsa, the power of interpretation of Mimamsa. Again, linguistics, of course, that's political science will benefit from a good reading of Arthashastra and all the Niti Shastras that are there, and we should tell the world that democracy was not invented in Greece, that India also had democracy in the time of Buddha, and that's a myth that we Westerners like very much to build upon. What to say about mind and cognitive sciences, the study of consciousness? I mean, again, we can contribute a lot. Of course, Sanskrit is the language of yoga. Sanskrit is the language of Ayurveda. But the difficult thing to do, and that's another thing that we should get together and plan it properly, is how to extract this wisdom from the Sanskrit commentaries and make it available to people who do not know Sanskrit. It's not an easy thing, because people who has a thorough knowledge of the commentaries, they are not interested in modern Western discourse or academic discourse. And people who have very well trained in Western academics, they know not Sanskrit enough to go deep into these things. But I think a combined effort should be done to make this happen and make it a reality. And मैं 2-3 शब्द तो हिंदी में ज़रूर कहना चाहता हूँ आप लोगों के लिए. मुझे पता नहीं लोग मुझे हिंदू कह लेंगे या नहीं, लेकिन मैं अपने आप को हिंदू मानता हूँ. मैं तो पूजा पाठ करता हूँ, वेदा पाठ भी करता हूँ, अध्ययन करता हूँ, और सबसे ज़रूरी जो है मैं मेरे गुरुजी का चरण स्पर्श भी करता हूँ. नमस्कार.
Thank you, Oscar Bhai. That was wonderful. We've had such a rich sharing over the last 3 days we've come to the end of it. There's no time for questions. The only thing I wanted to say is that each of the verticals that we've discussed so far is so rich that we can have days and days of deliberations and discussions on them. But just to say a word about language and literature, it's really the crossroads of all those verticals: Ayurveda, yoga, cuisine, arts and crafts, spirituality, etc., etc. All those verticals somehow intersect in the realm of language and literature. Thank you all so much. Thank you. You can ask questions later. Please buttonhole the speakers outside. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again. I won't keep you for very long. I know it's been 2 long days. I'd like to just say thank you to the whole panel. Makarand ji, Paul Palmarozza, Robert Arnett. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce all your names properly. Chirapat, Prapandvidya sir, Paramacharya ji, Oscar Pujol, all of you. And I request Makarand ji to please give them their... I think you can give it from the person, yes, in that way, that's fine. Mr. Oscar Pujol first. And who's that? Chirapat Prapandvidya ji second. I mean these numbers are just random. Huh? They're not in terms of... Paramacharya ji. Paul Palmarozza ji. Mr. Robert Arnett. I'd also like to call our director. Alok ji to please come on stage and give the shawl to Makarand ji. A good round of applause for this panel, ladies and gentlemen, please. Thank you all very much. Now I have one duty to do, that is, it's a housekeeping announcement. All of those who have to hand in their flight boarding passes in Nalanda University, all speakers and participants, members of the organizing committee, Team India Foundation, especially the youngsters who have literally worked their dash off in order to see that this was a success, all our friends in the media, all our friends and those and staff of Hotel Taj Mansingh, EXP Conferences, our event managers, Neeraj and his team, Mohan and his crew for videography, Rukmini Vijay Kumar and her troupe, all other volunteers, advisors, and well-wishers. This is the first of many conferences, friends. We'll all see you next year. Have a safe trip, everybody, and give a big round of applause to all of ourselves.